Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to show you how to do this Crystal River bracelet. It's based on cup chain, so I'm going to be using some cup chain. This here is the SS 14.5, and it's in the crystal color with silver. I'm going to be using the opal color, which I love because it kind of matches everything, and it gives that shine and that brilliance, but also a little bit muted, softer look, which I really like. For this, we're going to be using the cup chain, and we're going to be using about a foot of cup chain. Because of that zigzag back and forth, you're going to be using more than you think. So you want about a foot of cup chain to play around with and work with. We're actually only going to be using about 10 inches, but always have extra. It's good, and that way you won't get to the end of your project and run out of space, basically. We're going to be zigzagging back and forth between 8mm rounds. Here I have glass pearls in the brown color. It's like a chocolatey brown, and then it's brown iris is the actual name. And then I'm going to be using, for my bracelet that I'm designing with the opal cup chain, I'm using this awesome strand of mint luster in a check glass 8mm round. Also gives that pearlesque look, but I really loved the color. Here in the example, I used an 11-0 in matte mauve, and then I use the Duracoat galvanized apricot in the 11-0s to kind of play off and show off the color of the glass pearls. What I'm going to be using in my example here is I'm going to be using silver just to kind of pop out the sides in place of that Duracoat. I'm going to be using the Duracoat silver in place of the apricot. And I'm also going to be using in my 11-0s the silver lined Montana. So it's almost like a grayish color, and it does have a tiny bit of a blue tone, but when you put it next to the green, it really kind of picks up that gray. And really what you don't see are some other beads that I have sitting here. On the back, you see that there's bugles. Those bugles kind of creates the track for the cup chain to lay in. So I'm using silver lined bugles in the crystal color, that way you really won't see them, and it's a 3mm bugle. If you don't have bugles sitting handy, you can also use your Delica beads. The Delica beads are going to also be used on the back and kind of tucked underneath, and I'm using those because of the size difference that I want to get and I want to kind of see. I'm using the bugles for mine here in the sparkle lined majestic mix. Honestly, you're not going to see them, so it really doesn't matter which you use. You'll only see a tiny little bit around the curve if you're not pulling tightly. Again, if you don't have the bugles, you can just use all your beads here. Because you do see the thread a little bit, and I've tried popping in a 15, I've tried putting in a bugle between, it just doesn't work because of the curvature. So because of that, I'm using white beading thread in a 0.006. That way, that opal color and the white look nice together, and I won't see a lot of extra thread showing. Here I use the green, and because of the color choice that I used, I really didn't see it much at all either, but it's still, I tried to cover it, didn't work. So instead of using a 15, which I thought I could do on the corners, it didn't want to sit right, and it kind of just fell to the back. So I'm just going to have a little bit of thread exposed. We can live with it using the 0.006 Wildfire in white. I also have a size 10 English beading needle and a cup button. This is in the zinc color, and I'm working on a bead mat. Handy next to me, I have a bent needle nose pliers. I have some super new glue. I have my snip cutters, my slip and snips, and I have my thread burner. We are going to be adding the clasp after the fact because you want to see kind of how many turns and when to add your clasp. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of move our button off to the side. We're going to be using all the beads except for our silver right now, the Duracoat. So I'm going to stick those on the sides. That's just the little fringe that gets added on the sides and then on the sides of your 8s. So those go off to the side, but what I am going to do is make little piles, cut my strand, make little piles of the rest of my beads, those Montana beads, the Delica beads, and then the bugle beads as well. Have the cup chain handy, and also cut apart your strands of 8mm rounds. So the first thing we're going to be doing is making our track for our cup chain to lay in and actually attaching the cup chain. I have my little sample piece here turned upside down so you can see it. The pearls are actually going to get added in after the fact, but I wanted to have some ready for you to see how this is working up. We're creating this little track here with our bugle beads and our delicas and our 11-Os, and it's creating a zigzagged effect because we're going to be doing this in groups of 4. So we're going to be doing 4 right angle weave sections and then kind of flipping our design and doing 4 going the other way. This is going to have a track for 4 of my cup chain to sit inside. So to get started, I want to add a stop bead to 5 feet of beading thread, which I have threaded on my needle. This stop bead was just sitting near my bead mat. You can also use one of the beads that you're working with. That will work as well. I'm going to leave about a foot of thread at the end since I need to add my clasp. And I'm going back through that bead 2 times. I'm going to go back with my needle going away from the stop bead, away from the tail. And that creates that stop bead. So you'll see 2 pieces of thread on this side. That's going to come off my project. So to start my right angle weave units, what I'm going to be doing is creating the units by using 1 bugle. Then I'm going to be using 2 delicas, another bugle, and then I'm going to be using 4 of my 11-O seed beads. This difference in size is what's going to create my curvature and my turn. If you're using the smaller colored cup chain, the SS12, your pattern is going to be 2 and 3, just to let you know. So what I'm going to do is go in then, and so back away from the stop bead, going back in a circle through my first bugle, my 2 delicas that I put on, so that group of delicas, and then through my bugle. That's going to create my first little right angle unit. I'm going to continue doing this, which is creating almost somewhat of like a triangle effect. And I'm going to continue doing this for 4 times, the same pattern on the same side. So now that I'm coming out of bugle, I want to continue my right angle weave by adding 4 11-Os, a bugle on the other side, and 2 delicas. I'm going to pick up the same bugle that I'm coming out of, sewing in a rounded circle to make that little loop, pulling the thread through. And at this point, before I go kind of back through, what I'm actually going to do is put in my first piece of cup chain. If you need help with right angle weave, please, actually, you know what? I'm going to teach you this line. Going back on my idea. I was going to make it a little bit more complicated but easier at the same time, but we're going to continue on. So I'm going to make my track first, and then I'll come back and add my right angle weave. Sometimes when I'm doing this, I created this the same fashion that I'm doing here. Hindsight, I thought, oh, it would be easier if we're going back through and adding the cup chain right away. But now that I'm thinking about it, I don't want to confuse you guys. So sorry about that little glitch. So I'm continuing on with my right angle weave, and I'm going to be always kind of coming out of my bugle bead. There. When I'm here, I'm going to continue on with that same pattern. So I want to do those 2 delicas because I'm getting that curvature. 1 bugle. 4 seed beads, back through the bugle in the circular fashion there, and then sewing back around, and I'm just flipping it because it makes it easier for me to hold. Going back through the delicas, and then back through the bugle bead. Give a nice tight pull, and then do 1 more section where your 11-Os are on the same side and your delicas are on the same side. So back through the bugle in the circular fashion. So back through the seed beads, and then you want to come out of bugle. So for the right angle weave pattern, you're always going to be coming out of a bugle bead, sometimes next to the delicas, sometimes next to the 11-Os. It's going to be every other pattern. Once I'm coming out here, you can see that's my first little curvature, my first little turn. Now I'm going to switch it because that's my 4 units. Now I'm going to go with my 11-Os, then my bugle, then my delicas. Go back through the bugle, and you can see then that's going to switch which way the curvature is going. I'm going to continue this then for 4 and do another turn again. Always again coming out of bugle and rotating between coming out the top and bottom. And little tail here, wanted to get in a knot. Come on. There we go. And just make sure when you do that turn, it kind of doesn't want to let you pull the thread tightly. You want to make sure that you are. If you see a little bit of extra thread, again, this is a baseline, so it's not really going to matter. But I still like to pull a little bit tight. Continuing on, and I'll show that turn again, and then we're going to continue the whole length of your wrist. We're going to be adding a clasp onto this, but it is going to be shrinking a tiny, tiny bit because you're going to be pulling those all sides kind of close together. So as you're doing this zigzag and when you go in to measure, make sure that those ends overlap just a tiny little bit, and that's how many cups of the cup chain you're going to use. However many little right angle units you use. I'm going to continue again, going through, doing that right angle weave. Coming out my bugle bead. And I have 1, 2, 3, so I need one more on this side, and then we get to switch. And I do realize that for some of you, I do so quickly, or speak quickly. I try to slow down. That's just my natural way of speaking. You can always slow down the video on your settings. So if you do need to slow this down, you can either pause, but you can change it on the YouTube settings. Now I have those 4 going that way. I'm switching back to the opposite pattern. And then that's going to create that turn so that that bend in the river of my crystal river here continues to occur. So you can see then it's going to turn back the other way. Again, do this for the length of your wrist plus just a hair extra. You want about 1 more section than the length of your wrist. So just to show as I'm working on my track here, I've gotten my zigzags in my pattern of 4. And when I put it on my wrist, it is going to just touch. What I'm going to do, and that's if I kind of spread it out, what I'm going to do is just make 1 more track, because again, these delicate beads, which are kind of moving around right now, are going to be smack dab next to one another. So these turns are going to be a little bit tighter. So that's going to make the bracelet a fair amount smaller. The nice thing also is we left lots on the end. So if you do get to the end and you say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize because I didn't pull tight enough, or it shrunk a lot more than I was realizing, you can always add to the end. We're also not going to cut our cup chain at all, because we are going to be adding. So just to show that turn, or that way, in case we need to add, in case we need to add, we can do that. So I'm just going to show that turn one more time, because I'm done my set of 4. And I do want to end on a set of 4 on that turn. That's just my personal preference. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you end. If you want to end in 2, so that way it kind of ends in the middle of a curve, you can do that as well, but that is up to you when you're working on it. After I'm done this here, again, I'm not going to add any loops or clasps because I'm going to be coming back down. I just want to make sure fit-wise. Anytime you have a bracelet that has a lot of turns in it or curves in it, you want to make sure that you are kind of leaving yourself some extra wiggle room at the ends. Because anything that does shrink up like this, a lot of times it shrinks up more than you think. Also, when it does shrink up, the amount of tension that you have on your thread can really switch the amount that it shrinks. So I don't want to give an exact amount and say you want to make it, a full 1.5 or 1.75 or 2 inches longer, because the tension on the thread is going to have a huge effect on how much longer it actually is. So I'm making mine one whole set of 4 longer, which is about right about 3/4, half to 3/4 of an inch larger than to fit my wrist. We're also going to be adding a little bit of length when we add our clasp. So that's going to take care of some of that as well. So once I get this little 4th one in my set on, and I am going to end coming out a bugle, just so you can see that you could continue on or keep going. Once I'm out this end bugle here, what I want to do is I want to come down and actually come out of my delica beads. So I'm going to come out of my delicas, and that's going to be on top of, or right next to my bugle. So I'm not going through the bugle, I'm just going on top of the bugle now is what I'm going to do. So we're going to kind of lay our track down, and I'm not worrying too much if it's zigzagging back and forth. It's going to continue to do this. Now I'm going to pick up that cup, or that foot of cup chain. We're going to create that swirly pattern by sewing over the top of the cup chain. The cup chain is going to move and contract and expand. There's those little kind of brackets down there that it's going on. I am going to be doing the whole bracelet where they touch. We're going to be going over the top of the cup chain, sewing it basically in place. When I come over top, I'm going to sew through my first 11-0 on the other side. Give a nice tight pull, and that's going to lay that first cup chain section in place. I'm not going to worry about it. It drives some people nuts that this first one pops up a little bit. It doesn't really bother me, and by the time I get the clasp on and this all lays down, I don't see it. Once I'm on the sides here, I'm going to start a little bit of my peyote stitch. To start my peyote stitch, I'm going to add one more of my 11-0 seed bead here. So you can see that one. Oh, I'm not thinking it needs to be my silver color. So you want to get out your silver color here. I'm going to add my one silver, skip a bead, sew through the next 2 beads, and come out. That's going to add that little pop of silver on the side here. When I'm coming through now to go to the next section to come out, I'm going to go through, over top of the bugle and over through the delicas on the other side. That's going to get that next one laying in place. Give a nice tight pull, and that'll kind of pull that bead down in place. And the next one is going to go over the next little section. So I'm going over always the little bugles there, basically. I'm going to go through one of my seed beads. You can see we're going to come right back down and kind of add our next seed beads in place, because we're only going to get to pick up every other, but we're going to reinforce this by doing the exact same thing again, but next time we're going to make sure that we come out on that side. So once I'm on the side here, I'm adding a seed bead. If you want to and you don't want to complicate life, what you can actually do right now is just sew completely down all of your seed beads. Flip over to the next section, sew down your seed beads. which on this side happens to be where my turn is. So I'm sewing down my next 4 seed beads. The one before it, I was sewing down my Delica beads. If you want to, and you really, really, really want to get it tightly locked in place, you can also sew back through the bugle bead. You can see I'm just kind of holding it there, making sure it's not getting on any of my cup button little edges there. So there's the first little section of 4 in place, pulling nice and tight, and I'm going to get my next section of 4 into place, sewing through those Delica beads, making sure that thread bridge is right where I want it to be between that next cup chain, sewing over then, picking up my next 11-ohs. So I'll skip the seed beads for now. Again, it's kind of like adding the cup chain in while I'm doing the base. We'll just make it easiest to follow. And that's going to start to create that zigzaggy funness. Again, you're just zigzagging over top of the bugles, so that little bar section of the cup chain is going to go right where the bugles are. And that's going to get our zigzag occurring. I'm going to continue the whole way down here, adding that cup chain with 1 cup chain per little zigzag that I'm doing. So I'm at the point now where I've gotten all that cup chain kind of in place, and you can see here how much more it's going to actually shrink up when I put my 8s in. When you pull it, you still have room for it to expand, so don't be fooled by that and think, oh my goodness, it's too big. What you can do to get your measurement, which is what we're going to be doing next anyway, is we're going to be adding these 8mm beads in place, and that is going to kind of pull it all together. That is going to shrink it up a lot, and that can give you an idea exactly measurement-wise how much we are looking at. So I did a foot of cup chain, which I knew was going to be more than I needed completely, but I am using more than just my wrist size. So I'm making a 6 3/4 inch bracelet here, and I have about 4 inches left of cup chain. So I used about 8 inches to do a 6 3/4 cup chain, just to give you an idea. 9 inches would get you about a 7, 10 inches will get you about a 7.5. So that's what I was saying, you'll have extra, but you can make a pendant. I've done a couple other videos with that. You can do earrings in this style as well. So keep that little bit extra, but I am going to have about 4 inches left extra on mine to do my whole bracelet that I did. So we're going to get in now, and I'm actually going to create that wave design in that bracelet. For now, I'm just going to keep my cup chain hanging out, just in case, and this is a good thing, just in case you guys get to the end and you think, oh my goodness, it did shrink way more, way less, that sort of a deal. That way you have it there, because you can't really reattach it once you unattach it. So once I'm at the end here, just to hold this in place, even though it's not really going to matter, what I'm going to do is I'm coming out the last bead. I've already added all of my cup chain, and what I'm going to do is, to get to the other side, just sew down through a bugle bead. If it'll let me, there we go. And going through that bugle, which you could have also done for the cup chain if you wanted, but sewing down through that bugle will allow me to add that last little piece of the cup chain and kind of center it in there. I'm going to go in then and cut it, so it doesn't really matter, but it's there. What I'm going to do now is actually go back through, and I'm going to be adding my 11-0 seed beads, and I'm going to be adding my my pearls, so that mint luster check pearl basically. And to do this, I'm going to be adding through bugles. So I'm going to be adding through the end of each of my 4 set of bugles. I'm going to be adding an 11-0, my pearlized bead 11-0, through one of the bugle beads. And the bugle bead that I'm going to be doing is every 4th bead, so I'm skipping 3 beads. So I'm coming out, and you can kind of turn your project over. I'm coming out one of my bugle beads, but I'm coming out in the wrong direction. So to get it back and centered, and depending on kind of where you are, it may be coming out right or wrong way. So what I'm going to do actually is, rather than sew back, which I can do, and since I am going to cut the cup chain, I am going to do that actually. I'm going to sew back out through. If you wanted to, you could go down the line and add the 11 O's in as well. Either way would work. So I'm coming out here on the side, underneath kind of one of the bugles. Just to start this first side, I'm going to sew through and just kind of make a little knot here. It's got a lot of thread ends here, so I apologize, it's kind of hard to see. But I'm just doing a little sewer's knot right here at the end. Get that tail out of the way. Now I'm going to get ready to come down my sides. Again, you'll know that you're at the point where you want to go through a bugle because you're going to be at the turn part. So kind of push that tail off to the side. Again, I'm going to be adding an 11O in my alternate color, my luster bead, an 11O. And I'm going to sew through the bugle. That would be right at the end of that curvature. Try not to get any of my tail in. Give a nice tight pull. Coming out that bugle, I'm going to do the same thing. Get that tail out of the way. Add my 11O, my 8, my 11O. Sew through the next bugle. If you need to, you can also switch off to a size 10 needle, depending on which thread you're using. I hate size 10 needles, but when you flip it over now, you get to see how that creates that pretty, that it lays up a little bit. Oh, love it. So I'm going to continue on doing this easy step here of the 11 O's in that alternate color, which again is that silver color, and then sewing through the bugle where it changes. I do find it easier to go through the back, just so that way you can see exactly where you need to. But at the end of each one, give a nice tight pull, and that's going to make sure that you get the maximum amount of curvature. I'm going to continue going right down the line here, adding in my beads. And you'll know how many beads you need because it's going to be based on the number of curves that you have. And you can see how much that's kind of pulling it in and getting that design puckered up, which is the way that we're going for. And you can see how much shorter it makes it. Again, you have your extra cup chain there, so if you get to the point that you say, oh my goodness, this is way too small, you got your extra there, so don't worry. And I'm going to continue just with my next 4 beads, adding them on, and then I'll catch up with you guys. So I've gotten to the end of my cup chain here, and what I actually want to do is put on my clasp. Now you can see the amount that it does shrink, and you want to give it kind of a nice tight pull towards the end, so that way you make sure that it does shrink. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 beads of my 8O seed bead, or my 8mm beads in my bracelet. So I've got 10 of those, just to give you an idea how many curvature turns that I have. So you're gonna have one of those for every 4 beads. So I have about 40 cup chains. We started out with exactly a foot of cup chain, and I have about 3 inches left of my cup chain. So you can see it shrinks up a lot, and my wrist size is rather small. So you can see I have enough space there for my clasp between the 2 of them. So since I know that it does fit me and I don't need to go back and add more of my underedge, I'm going to take a wire cutters, which I didn't think to tell you that you need to have handy, so that's my fault, and I'm going to cut off that cup chain. That way it's not in my way, and then I'm going to come over and do my clasp. So to cut the cup chain, I'm just going to do exactly like it says. I'm going to go in between 2, making sure I'm not going to cut any thread, and I'm just going to chop that off. Because of that, you will have a couple extra little pieces of thread at the end. We'll tackle that issue when we get to the end, so don't worry about that. Right now I'm going to go back to the end that I was working on, and what I'm going to do is my loop for, actually I'll do my cup button first, why not? I'm coming out of one of my bugles, and what I'm going to do is add one of my 11-0 seed beads. And that's just going to get kind of that color difference there. I want to put on 3 of my grayish, that Montana, 1 of a silver, go up through the cup button, put on 3 more of my 11-0 galvanized. If you have an opal cup button left, or I'm sorry, an opal piece of your cup chain left, you can actually go in and put that right in there and glue that in there. Actually, I'll do that after, so since we have it. So skip the seed beads going through. I like the look of that. You're going to take your thread through your bead, and you're coming out the other side. On goes the silver 11-0, the 3 Montanas to match, and I'm going to go back through that 11-0 that I put on in the silver color. Because the bugle is getting a little bit tight there, and I want a chance to kind of tighten this up anyway, I'm going to add another bugle right beside the last. That's also what we're going to do on the other end to kind of hide up some of that thread. So I've gotten that other bugle on. I'm going to go back through my 11-0s and my 8. That's going to tighten this whole thing up. So I'm going to go back down the whole line here of my beads, going back through all of the beads. If you can go through your bugles one more time. If it's tight, what you're going to do is take this opportunity to go over your cup chain one more time. That's locking it in place there. And you're going to go through then your next beads. And that gives a nice tight pull. And then you're going to skip over the top of your next little chain section, pick up the 11, the 8mm, the 11, over the next piece of cup chain. Just making sure as you're going, I'm pulling slowly, because I don't want anything to happen where my cup chain is jeopardized because it's twisted with thread. I'm just going to continue going down the line. Again, this is going to reinforce, make sure that that curvature stays nice and tight. And it's pretty quick, and it's well worth it. It also makes it so that your beads are not super recessed. I want them recessed a little bit, but I don't want them super recessed in my project that you can't see them at all. So I'm going through my 11s and my 8s, just going over the top of the cup chain in each of that fourth section. Once I'm through this portion, I'm going to get to the end and add my clasp, my loop, and then I'll come back and decorate my sides with my 11-0 seed beads. So there's a number of different things in this project because it is one of those bracelets that it has 12 million steps. There are a number of times that you could do one step versus the other. I'm just trying to do it the easiest I can for you guys. That's why in that one section I said to do it a different way. Pulling down. If you have a tail on the other end, try to just kind of push it out of the way. When I get to the end then here, I'm going to come out my 11-0 seed bead. If I can, which I really want to do, I want to go through that last bugle that's there. Again, you may have a little bit of thread showing on the side. Give a nice tight pull. Your project will lay down then. I love it. Once you're out the end here, what you're gonna do after giving a tight pull is we're gonna do our loop clasp. To do my loop clasp, which is gonna fit around my cup button here on the other end, what I'm going to do is use some of my sea beads, and I'm gonna use all 11 O's. So I wanna do 1 silver, just like I did on the other side. I'm gonna do about 28 of my Montana here. If you want to, another really pretty idea is you could actually make the loop with your extra that you're going through. It'd be a little stiff, but you could actually make your loop crystal as well. Another idea here, just to show you, is that you could come back down the other side, kind of caging that in with cup chain. But I'm gonna put on between 25 and 28 11 O's. Again, this is all in my silver lined Montana color. Once I have those on and I know that my loop is going to fit my cup button, then you want it snug but not too snug. And keep in mind you're just going to have a little tiny bit of a rise if you are going to glue in with E6000 a little piece of the cup chain, which since I have it left over, I'm going to do. And that was one of those things while you're making it, you change ideas, sometimes you change your colors, so just a little bit of E6000 will do. So I have my loop there. I'm gonna run back down the 11 O that's there. I'm going to add a bugle just like I did on the other side because that first bugle is getting tight. I'm gonna go through the 11 O next to my 8mm bead. And that's going to pull my clasp in. I'm going to reinforce this clasp, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to kind of show a tiny bit of thread, but you won't really see it. I'm going to go through my last Delica bead there, give a nice tight pull, go back up through the bugle that I just added, and through the silver 11 O seed bead at the start of my loop. The reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to go in now and make my loop a little bit prettier and reinforce it. To make the loop a little bit prettier, I am going to be adding some of my silver, my galvanized Duracoat silver 11 O's. To do that, I'm going to go through my first of my Montana beads, and I'm going to go in a peyote style. So I'm going to add 1 bead, go through a bead, add 1 bead, go through a bead. I'm just going to continue that the whole loop, and it's just going to decorate it a little bit, just to add a little bit of a pretty look there at the end. Since we have such a pretty bracelet, pretty blingy bracelet, we can't just let just a loop clasp. That's where I was saying I love to see what you guys make. You can share on our Facebook page if you want your different ideas. Sometimes I just don't have time to do all of my ideas, imagine that. And because of that, I love to see what you guys make. So that crystal loop would be a great idea. You can also do a loop here that I could add crystals, and just the Preciosa crystals or Swarovski crystals or Potomac crystals. I could add those in the loop, just in like I'm doing right now. I'm doing this peyote all the way around. And I may have to add thread as I'm coming down to add my little Duracoat fringe on the sides, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Thought I would have just enough, but I may need to add. Generally speaking, I start out with about 5 feet of my beading thread. That's about as much as I can handle, and hopefully not having to tie on. Anything much longer than 5 feet, I just get it all tangled. So I don't like to use more than it. Once I have this peyote loop done, which again is reinforcing my loop, I'm going to go back through that 11O seed bead. And once I'm through the 11O seed bead, I'm going to start decorating the sides now of my 11Os in the silver lined Montana here. So I'm going to be going through a seed bead, and I have this turned over backwards because I think it's way easier to see what you're doing because that cup chain is distracting. I'm going to pick up one of my galvanized silver, skip a bead, go through the next Montana bead, add a silver, skip that bead, there, and go through the next. And that's just going to kind of pinch that in. If you want to, you can also kind of zigzag. That will get you a little bit more kind of curved and curvature when you're working with it. So you're just kind of going right down the line here, adding these in place. That's going to pick up and grab them all. So picking up a silver, continuing with that peyote stitch the whole way down this one side. And that also really kind of pulls in that clasp that we did. So I'm going the whole way down this outer edge, doing this little peyote fringe line. And this, for the example piece, I really loved the colors, and I think it really kind of made the bracelet pop, the ones that I used. A couple more of my Duracoats. And then I'll turn it over after this one and show you guys what it looks like so that we get the full effect. And as soon as I'm done this line, I'll show you how we get to the other side. So I'm gonna move some tail off, which I got tangled in, but hopefully you can't see it too much. So I'm here at the end of my little row that I've added, and I'm going to pick up an 11-0, and I'm gonna go through my bugle bead. If it's really tight, just skip right over the bugle bead. You're not going to be able to tell unless you have a tail all wrapped up. Okay. Once I'm through to the other side, and now you can see it in all of its glory. Once I'm through to the other side now, I am going to continue on with that peyote look with just those little fringe on the side, and just that little bit of pop of the silver is really going to brighten up the whole bracelet. So I'm coming out the end here, and I would usually add an 11-0 on here in the silver. I'm not going to. And what I'm going to do is go through my silver lined Montana, pull my thread through. I did add thread, and I'm sorry I completely forgot to press record for that. I do it on a lot of other videos. There's also a video just showing you how to add thread if you need that. I'm going to reinforce my clasp here, going up through all of my beads, through that top of my cup button, down the other side, and down the 11-0. And then what I'm going to do is essentially be done. I am going to glue in E6000 in one of those pieces of my opal cup chain. Right now what I'm going to do is make loops and do sewer's knots. A number of different places on my projects. I usually like to do it about 4 times before I cut off the thread, and I just follow the thread line, going through, picking up one of the bridge threads, making a loop, and then sewing through that loop, and making that knot. And again, I'll come down then also and glue in. I already did this on my other side just to get rid of some of that thread that was all in my way. And I wasn't thinking about going and coming back and forth. I do have just a little bit of thread there from where I added. Here's the back of the bracelet if you want to take a look at it. There is the beautiful front of the bracelet. Here it is on my wrist, which I think it's way prettier on the wrist. It's hard for the camera to pick up that opal cup chain, and then there's the crystal one. And you can see if you would do it multiple levels, that's kind of the look that you would get. To glue in, so I'll just trim this down for now, and then I will glue all at the same time. So I have that kind of knotted and taken off. I'm just gonna trim that one down. And now what I'm gonna do is glue in that cup button there, or that piece of cup chain right there at the end. So I have my extra couple inches of cup chain, and what I'm gonna do is take my pliers, and these are my needle nose pliers, or I'm sorry, my cutters, cut one of those off. If you can, you kind of want to let it dangle so that the extra little piece of silver is sticking out, and try to pull that with your cutters and cut off as much of that as you can. You can take a file and file that down if you want, but that will keep that from popping out as I'm working with it. So what I'm going to do now is grab some E6000 glue. That's definitely the type of glue that you want to use because you want that to stay in there and bond it. So now to glue in that little piece, you could also glue in a Monty, you can glue in a crystal, that's up to you. I'm just going to take my E6000 here. Just drop a little dab of glue. Put that lid back on the E6000. Drop that opal piece of cup chain right in the middle there, right in place. Push down. Before it dries, I'll go in there with a toothpick or with my needle, a little cotton swab, and kind of pull off any extra that's there that I don't want in there. But it's going to dry right in place there. Then as it dries, you can go in and you can glue with super new glue all your little ends, burn them down, but that's it. You have this awesome Crystal River bracelet, which when it's worn is going to be one of those pieces that everybody says, oh my goodness, did you make that? Where did it come from? Again, you do see a little thread, but there's no great way. I've tried 15Os. Because of the curvature, it really just doesn't like beads in between there. But if you get a color that's close, you don't notice it that much, so never fear. The different colors really are going to play up in the different designs. Here I have the matted underneath the crystal that kind of makes it pop. That opal one that really doesn't kind of want to show here on the video. It really lends itself to the greens and the yellows, and I was tempted to do blue, but I didn't because I do everything blue. But it's a rather tedious bracelet, but it's totally worth it. Again, one of those, like if you've done the Potomac Crystal V bracelet that I did, I think every time I wear that somebody comments, this is going to be another one of those bracelets. So hopefully you guys enjoy playing around with this cup chain that I've been playing around with, adding some 8mm round beads. You could use faceted round for a little bit more bling and kind of play up with that. But it gives you a great use of the cup chain and some different products that you may have sitting around as well. If you want to learn some more classes, take some classes in a store, go to PotomacBeads.com, visit our locations page, and stop by a store near you, or if you're traveling, make sure that you check out if there's a store while you're traveling in your vicinity. You can also shop with us online. Underneath the video here, there's a Show More button, and it will link to all the different products that are used in the video. You can also then purchase from us online if you need to for those materials. Again, share on Facebook. We'd love to see what you make. Play around with this twisted design. There's a lot of things that you could sit on top of this awesome little kind of train track that we created underneath this Crystal River. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Everybody have fun making this statement, beautiful piece, and happy beading.